fourth time that we were able to get together, technically our third meeting of the Affordable Housing Working Group. I really appreciate all of your time and dedication to this group. I know all of you have incredibly busy schedules. We're going to start off with our agenda for the item. We're going to do welcome and introductions. I'm going to go over the scope of work, remind everyone what the ask is of this group, talk a little bit about what we're going to cover in today's meeting, reserve some time for any reflections on past meetings, and then we're going to dig in. I don't have lengthy presentations for you today. What I've prepared is a PowerPoint that just quickly summarizes the prior presentations that we've talked about, some of the items that you guys have asked us to produce in terms of further research or mapping exercises, and then some discussion prompts so that we can address those scope of work questions that we have. And then we'll talk about, we also are going to present to you guys today. We've started pulling based on your discussions and your recommendations, draft matrix of recommendations and findings that will start to form the basis of a final report and recommendations. So we're going to get that out to you guys for you guys to review and provide input on. So I'm going to pause here and we'll do some welcome introductions. My name is Jessica Bella. I'm one of the deputy directors here at Howard County's Department of Planning and Zoning, and I'm one of the primary staff support for this affordable housing effort. So I'm going to start with our online team, and I'm going to kind of just run as the names go across the screen. So I'm going to start with Tom Evans. And Tom, if you can hear us, and I know it's hard to sometimes get to that unmute button, so. All right, Tom, I'm gonna let you struggle with that one, but we'll move on to Justin. Why don't you kick us off for our online?
Hey, Justin Kennel, Vice President with Bizito Development Company.
Great. Peter.
Hi, Peter Engel, Executive Director of the Howard County Housing Commission.
Great. Tanika.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tanika Richardson. I'm a Howard County resident and a policy analyst with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy.
Great. Catherine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Catherine Valentine, a resident of Howard County, currently working for DC government.
Great. Ned.
Hi, Ned Howe with Enterprise Community Development. I'm Vice President there.
I think I saw Jacqueline on her own. So. Jacqueline, are you still here with us?
Don't see her.
She might have had to drop off. Okay, I think we've gotten everyone online. So I'm going to go around the room. Jeff, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, Jeff Bronner with the Research Division in Howard County DPZ.
Sarah Latimer, Planning Supervisor with the Division of Comprehensive Community Planning in DPZ.
Jeff Delmonico with the Division of Comprehensive Community Planning with DPZ.
Paul Ravel, small local residential land development.
All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to ask Jeff to share his screen. And as I promised at our last meeting, I will try not to bog you guys down with hours of presentation, but I know it's always good to have a refresher. So we're going to get started. As I said, this is our third meeting. Today's agenda, we went over what we're going to be focusing on today. A reminder of our overall scope of work. These are the identified policies that really form the basis of bringing this group together, and the specific asks that you guys had. Next slide. There might be a lag. Yeah. So you guys have seen those over and over, so I'm not going to beat those dead horses. Just a reminder of what we've worked on in our timeline. Is our first meeting. We went over Howard County General Plan, the current housing environment, the definitions for affordable and accessible housing in the county right now. In our second meeting on the 21st, We talked a little bit about the adequate public facilities ordinance, the allocation chart, and starting to look at a more geographic understanding of where affordable housing is in the county right now. And started just barely to touch on some of the strategies that we could do for encouraging the production of affordable housing. And then for today, in meeting number 3, we're going to be talking about our reflections from what we learned in the last few meetings, and digging on and trying to take some of the discussions you've had and some of your recommendations and making them a little bit more specific, so that we can start working towards implementing some policies as well as some regulatory changes that can encourage the production of affordable housing. So I'm going to skip to slide 7 now and give a little pause here to see if anyone has any new thoughts or specific recommendations they've been stewing on since our last meeting. If not, we will continue on, but I wanted to give a pause, see if anyone had something that was just bursting to get off their chest. So. And we can no longer see you guys raise hands on the screen, so just go ahead and unmute yourself and voice up if you have anything to say. All right, I've successfully put everyone on the spot, so we're going to continue on. And we do have some prompting questions later on that we can dig into. So we'll go down to today's deep dive on slide 8. This is, again, what we're going to be talking about. This is the specific asks that you all had. And we'll dig in right from there into a quick review of when we talked about, if you will remember, a month ago, the current definition of affordable and accessible housing. And this is because this group has been asked to evaluate the feasibility of targeted incentive program and to create a definition of affordable and accessible housing. So if you'll remember on slide 11, and I'm going to pause here, I jumped ahead of myself. In the chat box, Jeff has shared with you guys a link to the webpage that we host this group's information on. And if you go to the November 4th meeting and under materials, this slide deck, as well as some of the other summaries from our last meeting, are available if you want to follow along on your computer rather than following on the shared slide. So feel free to use that link and follow along. And anyone from the public who's watching can also access that material. As we talked about in our prior meetings, is we do have some changing demographics in the county. Household size has decreased, although we've seen a slight tick going up since in the last census. But we do still see a preference and a need for some smaller housing sizes. That's partly just because of the type of homes that we have produced in the county for the last 20 years or so that really serve larger household sizes with larger lot, single family detached development. So there's kind of a lack of a certain kind of housing supply to fit certain gaps in the housing market. So that's a little bit what we talked about a month ago. Tom, we have discussed the need to kind of define missing middle housing. So we have a graphic that really helps people visualize what we mean by this term. It's not a new housing form. These housing forms have been in existence pretty much as long as humans have been building structures. But this term was coined to kind of represent the housing types that have really not been in production for the last 50 to 70 years. As the models for financing development and how we do land development, as well as suburban development across the United States has taken hold. We don't really produce these as much, and a lot of the current forms of this housing type is a lot of legacy housing. So that missing really refers to the fact that we haven't really been building these types, and as a result, we have a whole spectrum of housing needs that are not being filled. So when we say missing middle, these are what we're referring to. When you go to the next
I have
slide.
a quick question in regards to the missing middle real quick. Just out of curiosity, in regards to the missing middle, because I remember the last call, I know I had brought up the manufactured housing, and I know you said that the county did pass something to, I guess, to begin to allow that more. I'm just curious as why that's not included in the missing middle.
So I think manufactured housing, sometimes referred to as mobile home housing, I think that's kind of just not made it into the discussion of this kind of housing type. Partly it's, I think mobile homes traditionally have kind of been given a black mark in a lot of zoning codes. So it's actually a state legislation that just got passed that says that if you allow a single family home type in a zoning district, you must also allow mobile or manufactured housing if that housing is going to be converted to real property, which typically means being put on a permanent foundation and then having an ownership model that is associated with the legal definition of creating real property. So I will say that the Opticos is kind of the one who coined the missing middle housing term. I don't think they've ever really discussed manufactured or mobile housing. I think a lot of time it's considered a more affordable form of detached, single-family detached homes. But I think that's a valid critique, and I would encourage the group, if you want to reference that, the need for that kind of housing is a more affordable alternative.
Well, I'll just add one thing if I could to clarify. I think they are different, manufactured and mobile. Mobile is something that has to be brought in on wheels. Manufactured housing these days tends to mean modular housing. So it's a piece of a unit or perhaps a whole unit that's constructed and brought in and typically is put on a foundation, or you have multiple pieces that are put together to build a row house or a single family house that might have 2 or 3 floors. It really is a different creature. So in my mind, I don't think we're looking for mobile home parks. Those are a different thing. And we could think of that perhaps as missing middle, but I think for the most part, people are moving away from mobile home parks as a issue with climate change, with other environmental concerns. So it would be something we could look at, but would be a really different direction for us. In terms of manufactured housing, I think it could be used to build a number of these housing types. And so it really is more of a construction method than a particular type of house.
So Peter, I'm just going to step in real quick. The Howard County zoning definitions do differentiate between modular homes and manufactured homes. So in the current zoning regulations, manufactured homes are considered mobile homes. Those have the same definition in our current regulations, and modular homes is defined separately. And then the state bill has different definitions for those terms as well. We'll send to the group the links to the current definitions for those housing types, so you can see what they look like, and then a little bit about the governor's housing bill and how that might affect this. But Peter's right that the modular homes are kind of considered that pre-constructed elements of a house off-site, or and then kind of shipped in and then put up together. I think a lot of times you'll see those like prefabricated walls that fit together is a little bit more of that modular home style, or like self-contained units that can be stacked onto each other or next to each other. And then manufactured housing it's typically referred to as what the federal government regulates as what we traditionally think of as a mobile home. So that's just a quick terms. But I think the primary thing to think about in Howard County is that traditionally manufactured or mobile homes have only been permitted in the RMH district, which is that traditional mobile home park. With the upcoming governor's legislation, as of January, we will no longer be allowed to, in the county, to prohibit and limit that type of housing only to that zoning district. So there will be some changes. We can send you guys some information about the governor's housing bill.
Yeah.
Tanika, I didn't want to cut you off. Did you want to raise more responses?
No, I thank you both for answering that. I mean, I just had like a legitimate question, because I know we're talking about missing middle, and I get the environment. Thank you, Pete. I didn't necessarily think about that aspect of it. I just was thinking about the cost from talking to other developers who are doing these homes in different counties across the state, that they're able to do these type of homes for a fraction of the cost of building a traditional home. So that's just kind of why I was just asking why that wasn't included in the missing middle. Because if we're talking about building and expanding homes, whether it's a townhome in Howard County, like developers are not building starter homes. So even if you guys are building this type of homes, it's not really affordable, even still. So
It
Yeah,
might,
I was gonna try
Please go
to say
ahead.
something on that.
no,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
is the idea of missing middle, because the missing middle at least in affordable housing circles is always related to income rather than product. So is it your attempt to then determine what product would potentially fit those income brackets? Because the missing middle, at least in the affordable housing world I've been in for 17 years, was 60% AMI to 120%. It was always about, the reason why it's missing is because 60% AMI and below had rental housing programs and subsidies through low income housing tax credits and things like that would cover it. People with incomes above 120% pretty much had the income to be able to live and have choice where they lived. It was that missing middle where there were no programs or no ability for people to be able to afford anything, and there's no programs to help them. And that was the whole idea of that middle sector missing out on opportunities. So,
yeah. So I feel like we're talking about the same thing. I'm also talking about cost too. Like rather, I mean, I don't care what it is. Like I didn't know that you could use mobile homes to build, like how Peter was saying, these other different types. I'm also talking about cost too, in that missing middle. Like for folks who may not make enough to be able to afford, 80% AMI, but also over income to not qualify for stuff that's under 60% AMI, which I will just say, and we can move on. It's nothing here in Howard County too much that I've seen. It's not too much that's 60% AMI that I've seen personally, because I've been looking, trying to help people, and I haven't personally seen it.
right, and that's the product type that
Yeah.
is specifically in the realm of using low income housing tax credits to build, and you have the subsidy that creates that so that people in that income bracket can live in decent housing without spending more than 30% of their income. And that was the whole idea of when we said missing middle. There just weren't programs in place to be able to support folks in those income brackets. And is it the attempt of this diagram to try to come up with housing types that perhaps could be affordable without subsidy? Is that the idea? I'm just kind of curious.
So we'll go into a little bit in the slides to follow, but I will say yes and is sort of the answer. So in the general plan discussions that went on for the last 4 years, when we talked about missing middle housing types and the policy recommendations associated, I think those were really focused about the product itself, the housing product. We know from other communities that have introduced incentives for these housing types, it doesn't necessarily guarantee them at affordable housing prices. I think there are some really great examples of beautiful cottage courts, but there's only 12 in the entire city. And so those are selling at a premium price because it's meeting a housing type need, and the people who can afford to bid up to get themselves that product that they're looking for can outbid everyone else. So I think in the conversation that we're having in the county, I think what I would say is part of what we're looking for from this group to discuss is how many of these housing unit types are needed throughout the county in a way that we would ensure that these housing unit types and introducing them could also potentially serve as market rate attainable housing, housing that could be affordable without subsidies, and or what regulatory changes or incentive structures do we need to create so that it is easier to subsidize these housing types to allow people to be able to afford them. So I think you can think of a variety of different strategies. First, how do we get these housing types to be built so that they meet a variety of needs? And then how do we get them to be affordable as subsidized housing and attainable as market rate housing? Does that help clarify?
Yeah, it does. And just to clarify, when you say affordable housing, are we specifically talking about rental housing or home ownership or both? Or
I think both. I think the policy guidance we've seen is both to concentrate on how do we get more affordable rental markets and how do we get more affordable home ownership markets. So, if you all can just solve all the housing problems that have been developed for the last 100 years. That'd be very helpful. But I think it's more just, I think when we talked about forming this group as part of the general plan, we really wanted to make sure that the incentives and regulatory changes that are being discussed are based soundly in what can the people who are building this product, who are financing these products, what do they need to make it actually happen? Because we want to make sure that those are based in reality, essentially. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going through and developing our incentive recommendations, as well as some regulatory changes. Since you guys are living it, you're building the housing or you're financing the housing, and you know where it sounds great on paper, but I can't make the numbers square to make it happen.
May I comment real quick on this
Please.
one? So I work for Bizzuto, and our specialty is really the mid-rise product. In the past and more recently, we've developed kind of mid-rise condos for sale and also the townhouses. I think my biggest takeaway from looking at this graph is I think it's important for somewhere in Howard County to have higher density areas than the single family houses. And that's what is reflected in the missing middle housing, whether it's townhomes or you see 3-story structures, which could be wood framed. I think that would be smart because I just don't know at what scale can you find some of these builders to do live work structures or fourplexes or cottage ports. They may be out there, but I just haven't seen that housing product in quite some time, and just don't know how fast you can build at that smaller scale. But having a higher dense kind of zoning overlays, I think, would help support builders as they decide, what kind of product they can build that's higher than single family homes.
Well, that certainly seems to be the answer to anything. To back it off to its simplest concept, the laws of supply and demand are alive and well in the housing market and in Maryland in general and other places. I mean, just the difficulty it is to produce housing at the level of demand that's out there hasn't met it for a long time, and that's what's been driving prices up for forever. But I don't know if that's, when we get into affordable housing, it's like what definition of affordable housing you're talking about. I mean, it's, for sale stuff and everything, obviously those are level setting fields, but a townhouse in Howard County anywhere, or even a condo for the most part, is going to not be affordable to people at 60% or even 80% AMI or below. So, I mean, we're really talking about, I don't know how much middle we're serving with this. We're still going to be serving from these type of products, a higher income individual that is typically, I guess, having to pay more in Howard County because of the supply and demand issues, but still not really getting to the core of the lack of housing for those at the lower level incomes.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Cedric Brown. I just wanted to make a comment regarding the missing middle housing. And when I hear that term, I think of infill housing, and I think it's a particular type of housing that we are, able to build on a given site that, it's a smaller site. So I think the image was portraying the different housing types or property types that could fit on an infill available site. So I don't know that it was necessarily directed at the affordability of the unit, but rather it was the housing type that could fit on a infill site, if you will.
I think from my perspective, all valid discussions as part of this. This is a much broader conversation. If there's more to say, I don't want to move on too fast, but otherwise I can keep going forward. I am going to, Ned, I want to put in a pin in one of these specific asks that this group was asked to discuss was, how do you want to define affordable housing
Yep.
in Howard County? So we will certainly come back to that, because I I certainly would benefit from this group's having a very clear understanding of, okay, what percentage of the area median income is actually affordable? And then what can we be expected to provide in those kind of housing types at that level? Is certainly something that would benefit us.
And what area median income are you talking about?
Yes,
That's another.
all that. All right. So you guys speak up. Do not let us plow through. Please voice up if you guys have thoughts or questions. Definitely today we want to focus heavily on discussion and leaving room for that. So I'm going to continue on, except that I just lost my place on the slide. So let me scroll back down.
We're on slide 13.
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Tom Evans,
Hey, Tom.
and I finally got connected.
Oh,
The missing middle housing, to me, looks like it's almost a topic for new town zoning, where you would have room to build these different types of housing. I mean, to put this into an infill situation just wouldn't make sense at all.
interesting. So our current policy guidance as part of our general plan is to expand the number of zoning districts that allow for different types of housing, both from an infill, but also potentially redevelopment model. Howard County has a lot of lower density suburban development where there's still significant amounts of land that could be utilized for additional housing, as well as just some current housing development that still has development room, essentially, homes that were built on 1 or 2 acre sites. Currently, the zoning regs might allow them to build up to 4 or 8 homes on those sites. So we potentially want to allow a regulatory mix in terms of density and setbacks to promote missing middle housing types if those go into redevelopment. But I appreciate, Tom, I would be interested in teasing out more. Are you concerned about how these fit within existing built environments?
I just can't see a contractor or developer putting this type of housing in an infill situation, because to make it worthwhile, it would appear to me that you need to build multiple duplexes or multiple fourplexes or whatever to make it worthwhile, and that's going to require a pretty good sized piece of property.
So from like a financing point of view, it'd be difficult to finance this kind of project at the smaller scale?
I don't know about the financing, but I'm just talking about area or being able to insert it into an infill situation.
Well, I think that a place where it's commonly done, or it used to be commonly done, was not by a developer going for scale, but a smaller developer taking a single family lot and turning it into 4 units. Or things like that. If you're building, a string of townhouses, you can certainly do townhouses at any scale, depending on what land you've got. That would be probably less infill and more development. It would depend on which of these models you're going for. I don't know. It excludes anybody in particular.
And this is Cedric again. That's the point I was making. If you look at the range of what's on that image for missing middle, it goes anywhere from duplexes to mid-rise buildings. And that was exactly my point. If you have a site that's available, it might be something that you could put a duplex on, but not a mid-rise building. So on the smaller end of the scale, a site that's existing, or if you're taking down a single family home, that's something that you could put something on the far end, the left side of the scale, which would be the duplexes and the side by sides, or even the townhomes as mentioned. So You know, it's just a matter of what site is available and if it's for an individual or a smaller developer. But, you know, not everything is going to accommodate, you know, 100 units. And I think that's the point of the missing middle, to take advantage of any site that's available and to put some type of housing there and to increase the number and the supply of housing.
Well, actually, the simplest way to define it is the product types you got there are going to range from about 6 to 8 per acre up to 25 to 30 per acre on your 3-story product. That's pretty much the range that you've got there with that product. So whatever the usable land is, it's going to vary in that range. And then once you start getting a 4-story elevator product, that's when you're getting to 35, 40 per acre. And that's, I guess, when you get into your mid-rise stuff. So you're looking at those duplexes are probably 6, 8, maybe townhouses are 10, 12. And then the 3-story product is going to get you to that 20 to tops, maybe 30, depending on the configuration of the product.
Anything anyone
I
else wants?
have to summarize and bring this back. I would think that, you know, missing middle, just because you're kind of saying it, you know, I think you defined as well that it's housing type. So in some ways, it's really about density. Help get that pricing. And then in Howard County, assuming we're not, you know, to Ned's point, that we're not going to be suddenly increasing the supply dramatically, they still could get bid up unless there was some program to, with that density, ensure some percentage are at below market. So, I mean, those seem to me the two pieces to get missing middle.
Peter, can you tease that out more? Are you thinking about similar to the MIHU model about having a certain requirement for a certain number of units that are being built to be
I mean, it's
affordable?
Yeah, I mean, it could be MIHU, or it could be just that, you know, it's a MIHU that is a little bit more explicit. Instead of saying for everything you build, you got to do a percentage, we would just say, you know, much more explicitly, we're going to allow by right density of X amount. You know, if you build to that density and provide a certain number of units as affordable. That might be one way to get there. You know, there could be other ways to get there, which is you just zone a lot more, you know, zone more land for higher density. You know, you drop that in through overlay districts or whatever we want. And then have a separate program to incentivize affordable. You know, you could look at that as well. So I think there are a number of ways to combine the two, but it seems like those are the two components you need to address.
Peter, this is Jeff. Do you think it would work? Like right now, for example, we have pretty much inclusionary zoning in Howard County. Almost, not all, but almost all zoning districts require an MIHU percentage, like 10%. So with given what you were saying, you know, right now it's 10% of all units have to be MIHUs. If the policy was to provide for like a density bonus, so you can increase the density, but instead of 10% MIHUs, you go up to 15% MIHUs. And kind of like a structure where the more density that's allowed, the greater percentage of MIHUs are required. Because I think the struggle is just because you increase density, unless it's done a lot dramatically, I think there's still going to be an affordable housing problem. So I think what you were saying is you still have to combine it with sort of an MIHU program. Would that work though, where you would increase the percentage MIHU given if you have a certain amount of increased density?
I think yes. I mean, I think in general that would be another way of addressing the two issues simultaneously, which is you know what I think we're one solution to all of this. I do think it's simpler. You know, the sliding scale starts to leave a lot of variables, and in some ways it's simpler, and people would have a better understanding. We just said, you know, we're not that we would do this, but as an example, all single family zoning now allows up to 6 units, but at least 2 of those, you know, 2 of 6 or, you know, 1/3, whatever that ratio would be, let's just say would have to be at whatever we want to set, you know, some particularly set price or rent. If it's for sale or ownership. And you know, it would be a lot easier doing it that way than, I don't know, we're getting it. If we sort of resolved that this was the concept we were after, I think then the debate could go to what's the best program, you know, looking at sort of certainty for developers and for neighbors and relative ease of administration. You know, I've seen some MIHU type programs fail because they're just so hard to administer. So you want something, I think, you know, we then really kick into sort of program design mode to really dig down a little bit on it.
Yeah, and it also has to work from a financial feasibility standpoint. It's got to be economical, so you can't, you know, you have to figure out what that percentage is to make it so that it's financially feasible for the developer and the builder too. So that's something that would need to be looked into through, you know, look based on land costs and performance and building construction, all that stuff. Say, look, if you get a density bonus of 15% and you increase, they might choose 12%, does that work? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on how that, on the, you know, again, we'd want to sort of, you're right, you have to tailor the economics of that. Yes. I was going to get into details on that, but you're right.
So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which will end up being treading ground that we just tread. So just a reminder of how we define affordable and what you've been asked, as we just experienced what we mean by affordable. You know, it varies significantly across different contexts. In what one person thinks of as affordable in a specific area is applied to a specific kind of housing situation. Is everyone's going to have a different idea. One of the guiding principles for Howard County that the Housing Opportunities Master Plan showed is that we currently have housing development that we think should prioritize households making 120% of less than 120% of the area median income, and renter households making less than 60% of AMI. I know that one of the discussion points we've had is, do those numbers ring true? Should those be adjusted? Should we have a range of different target incomes and requirements tied to those? I think that's part of the questions that this group's going to have to wrestle with. And if any information you can provide would be very helpful for the county as we kind of develop our numbers. And then, as we talked about, there's a big difference between affordable housing, being those that have income restricted controls on them, versus attainable, which is really what we mean by market rate housing that can still be affordable to a household that has a lower income. Go to the next slide, please.
I'm sorry, are we ever going to jump into this, or do we just kind of keep it up and go over it? Is this the time to jump into it, or? Oh.
If you guys are ready to jump into it, I will say this was sort of a summary of some of what we discussed, and then I was going to kind of pause at some prompting questions, but I do not tail thoughts that come into your head, because I know sometimes they'll come and then they'll go. So Peter, if you want to stop here, we can talk.
60% and 120% of area median. Done. Don't mess with the, you know, why tinker with this?
And I think that came from the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, which was an extensive effort that included real estate consultants who were very familiar with this. The reason I think 120% AMI was for ownership was because it's not financially feasible to have, for example, 60% AMI ownership. That's why they make a distinction between rental and homeownership. Does that make sense? If I remember right, that was sort of the thinking, that you could say 60% AMI ownership, but can you really achieve it? Is that possible from a financial standpoint, given land prices and given construction prices and given the ownership model? I mean, typically rental is, the concept is you rent when you first start out, you have lower income and then you move up to home ownership. I know some people want to have more home ownership, but the question is, how do you achieve that? How do you achieve affordable home ownership? And the 120% was sort of the answer that came out, I think, at the time.
When it says making less than 60% of AMI, what it really means is between 55 and 60%. Below that 55%, people just cannot afford. So it seems like a nice policy, 60 to 120%. But nearly half of the working people in Howard County aren't making 50% of the AMI. And we do not have housing for them. I could be able to solve it all at one stroke, but I think we got to be mindful of the fact that half of the people who work here are not in that statement.
Paul?
Hi, this is Jackie. Can you go back to the slide on the income tiers and levels, please? I think that's helpful for the discussion. I think it might have been forward. You just no. I think you had just shown the slide and moved from it. What does 60% of AMI look like? What is up to 120%?
Number 14, slide 14.
Oh.
Yes, that is very, very helpful. And just to echo what Peter was saying in terms of how we look at affordability and the distinction between rental housing and then the moderate income housing units or tiers that we target, I think that those are the appropriate levels. And there's flexibility, you know, as we look at whether it's home ownership or attainable market rate housing, you know, that those tiers from 60 to 120% of AMI are appropriate. It does come down to the devil of the detail of how do you program, what does the program implementation look like to target those units? And then looking at, you know, describing the low income tier between 30 and 60 or, you know, up to 60% of AMI is an appropriate level. But I think this is very important because we're looking at people who live in the county that make up to $70,000, $72,000 a year and still can't afford to live in the county. As well as, you know, those at lesser AMIs. And I always feel like it's important when we're talking about affordable housing that we look at what we're, you know, who are the people that we are trying to find housing for and what are those income levels that we're targeting, because it's glaring. People should be able to live anywhere in this state comfortably if they're making, you know, $70,000 over $55,000, $65,000. One would think, right? And we just don't have that. So I think we just have to keep reminding ourselves of who we're targeting, in addition to those that are at the extremely low income levels, because those are residents who are already here within Howard County that we need to provide this housing for. So I just think it's just a reminder. I think it's important that we always look at these income levels and these tiers so that we become more acquainted with it and know who we're targeting our housing for.
This is Tom. How often is the AMI set? Is that whenever they run a census, U.S. census, or is it determined in the meantime between census?
Once a year.
Yeah,
It's annual.
I think it's, I do know that the MIA2 program that the Kelly Seminoles group runs in the housing department, they look at it once a year based on the census, based on the American Community Survey of the census.
MIHU is the county median, the area median, which is, I think, what we're talking here, which is the whole Baltimore metropolitan area, is done every year, once a year. Ed said that, Paul said that.
Okay, thanks.
So I do wish Kelly was here because this is her bread and butter.
Yeah.
I think we talked a little bit about the, in our first meeting, we talked a little bit about how we currently set these standards and the fact that we have a challenge of providing both those deep income needs, the extremely low income, the low income, and then the moderate income. But it is very difficult with the larger lot suburban homes that might only be producing a certain number of new homes to actually make these numbers work out for those. So I think part of the discussion is that I have heard bandied about in the county for a while is, do we want to have a range of these different AMIs and then have kind of escalating or increasing incentives that would functionally work to produce these? And if so, do we have an idea of other models that other jurisdictions have done that have kind of successfully produced these kind of housing units at these income levels? And if the answer is no, then I think we're all struggling a little bit.
Well, another reason I wish Kelly was here is that because almost all of this missing middle housing will be scattered, administering one of these layered subtle programs could be really tricky. I think MIHE was hard enough, but most of them are through property managers. So 1,000 of them, they deal with a handful of property managers. But in these kind of 1 off, 2 off, 3 off, they're difficult to administer. So in addition to figuring out how to go lower in the AMI, we need to figure out how to make it workable.
I think the one thing that's got to be emphasized is, and I know this is kind of a zoning and an incentive exercise from a product standpoint and density and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, 60% AMI and below housing, there is really only one solution for that, and that's subsidy. It does not, you cannot produce it no matter what density you're going to provide on virtually any site. You're not going to get in a position where that density is going to offset the costs to serve incomes in those brackets. So that's, to me, never a zoning issue so much. When you start getting to the higher levels of income and for sale products and things like that, that gets back to the supply and demand. More is better, and pricing will, equate to that. But at the lower levels, it's not really a density or a zoning question. Although we need zoning and density in anything we do for affordable housing, but the real question is, do we have the subsidy in place to be able to create it? Because that's the only way you're going to get there.
Well, Ned, I agree with you that it requires a subsidy, but it's not necessarily a government subsidy. So, I mean, it could be a pilot or something that is more government,
right.
or the extra density could provide a cross subsidy that gets you there. So by building, 6 rental units instead of 1 for sale house, and having the rents on 4 of them be really high, you can do 2 at a lower rate and get there. So I think that would depend on the amount of density compared to the land cost.
Potentially, I would still say you're still not. I mean, the interesting thing is the mix, the cross subsidy idea and all that kind of stuff is again, you're not exactly creating affordability on the part that's creating the cross subsidy, because it's got to be paid for somewhere else. So it's still going to get picked up somewhere. Like I said, I don't think you're ever going to get to those income levels without significant amounts of subsidy, period. But there are cross subsidy opportunities. We've talked about it, and there are some of those out there. But again, the other side that's providing that cross subsidy has to be maximized to be able to pay for. There's going to be a cost differential, what that cost is, and what income is going to be derived by those income brackets, and it's never going to support the cost.
Well, it's true. I think it might, depending on how we structure it, but that's sort of getting into the details of the second part of this, how you subsidize it. But
right.
I think your other point that what you're saying is that if we were to if you have to completely maximize, make these really high-end units for the cross subsidy, you're kind of self-defeating a little ways. You're getting a couple of affordable units, but you're not getting the missing middle out of that you kind of want. You're kind of making those be as expensive as possible. So yes, there is a trade-off.
Jeff, I'm gonna ask you to skip the next slide because I think we've actually talked about it, and just kind of jump into the discussion slide number 16. So these are some of the specific questions that we generated as a result of both prior questions that came out of the general plan processing, and then also in response to some of your prior discussions. So I kind of want to just cover these and see if you guys have any specific responses to these. I think if you remember and recall that we have a specific number of allocations for dwelling units set aside in our adequate facility ordinance allocation chart. And there's been discussion about how those could be used to incentivize the production of affordable housing. Some people have discussed, should they be density bonuses? And then the percentage, could those be used for some market rate units that you could increase the overall density, but you can only access those at higher density if you also provide more affordable housing? Should they be used for kind of the overlay? And then obviously the discussion about the fact that we have not been using up all our allocations. This time, we just do not have enough growth demand in the county that we're not utilizing all our allocations. So does it even make sense to try to base any kind of incentive program off an allocation bonus is one of our questions. And then we started to allude to this, is do our income restricted housing income brackets support the various incomes of our workforce, as you guys were discussing, where, we might set certain limits and we're still not creating enough housing product that is accessible to our higher income, let alone our lower income, and what kind of programs or incentives could target those. Also, as part of the definition of affordable housing, you were asked to kind of discuss the housing types themselves. That size, unit type, that's when we're getting into the missing middle a little bit, that can meet these different groups' needs. And I think you guys have already started having to tease this out, is do we focus on the price? Do we focus on the design? Is there a way to do both? How do we mash those together? What are the tools that we make them affordable or not? Is it even possible? And then the fifth one is actually a whole nother range of a group of people who physically cannot access the housing that's being built. They need no step entries or extra grab bars or no stair housing. So there's a whole accessibility issue from like a physical design perspective. You've all kind of been circling this in your prior discussions, but I wanted to throw these up there and see if they prompt any more thoughts or recommendations.
I do have one thought. I have no experience with it, but I do have a thought that on question 4, what if we considered form-based zoning that would allow a developer to attempt to meet the goals of a policy statement on a particular property, make a proposal that satisfies setbacks and height limits and deed restrictions and affordability, and let the marketplace propose to the government what the marketplace seems to want, and let it then develop into something. Right now, we're trying to guess what we should do, how we should do it, and we don't really know. We have a lot of experience around the room of what might work, what works elsewhere, but we don't have anything here, largely because we've been built out, and mostly built out by public home builders. So we don't have small builders building small product. So maybe what we do is ask form-based zoning, or allow form-based zoning, use a pilot or something like that, that would say to them, look, what we want to do is incentivize you to increase affordability. We want you to build with this pattern book. We want you to deal with accessibility, name all the top goals, and let the development community come back and say, we think this will work. What do you think? And get the community involved. I know it adds a process, and I was at the beginning of this thing saying we have too much process, but maybe this would be an improvement to the process.
I think it's a good idea because it doesn't try to, we know how difficult it is to set policy and code to make things fit into it, but if you let the market kind of come up with a solution for that, and it probably has to do with smaller size units. So
Yeah, I think this is going to be very small.
Exactly.
I think these are going to
Yeah.
be, 6,
Yeah.
8.
Right.
Wow, think big 10.
Yeah.
This is not 100 units. This is tiny.
Right.
This is not NV. This is not Beazer. This is not D.R. Horton. This is back to pickup truck builders.
Yeah.
And they're not here right now.
Is your idea that you could establish the basic massing
Yeah.
playground, basically saying within 20-foot setbacks on all sides and the height limit this, you can do whatever density per acre you can fit here, but here's some other basic restrictions is the housing types must have so many units that have no SIP entry.
Yep.
You can't have a housing greater than certain size square footage to make sure you
Or a mix of
yield
sizes.
or a mix of sizes and just basically kind of allow flexibility, but within a very tight bubble that would be
Not so tight.
acceptable.
Not so tight on the bubble because everybody knows that the dirt never cooperates.
Okay.
Right? So if you have a really tight bubble and then you go out to your site, it doesn't quite work because the guy over there has a legitimate thing and he's right, but we have a 35% open space requirement that has to include the forest and all that, and it just doesn't work. So I would say loosen up on the bubble a little bit, subject to approval of staff, not but of the hearing board. But if the developer, I don't know, you could score it, if he scores an 80 out of 100 on the chart or something like that, a little bit like green neighborhoods used to be. But give them some goals to hit, see if they can hit the goals that are most important to us, and then try it.
Yeah, set it up as a pilot, let's see if it works. Because aren't there developers out there that they want to build affordable housing?
Yeah.
I've seen companies out there that they specialize in this.
Yeah, there are net zero builders
Yeah,
out there.
yeah.
There are all those guys that are not the public builders. Right? Public builders are building $1.3 million homes on 7,000 square foot lots. They're not going to look at this.
Yeah.
Sorry to see.
Any responses? from
Well,
the group?
I think you're underestimating the builders market. There are small builders out there that will be attracted to this type of business because it's not the Ryan Homes and sorry, Justin, it's not the Bizzutos.
That's okay. I take no
you know,
offense.
So
I hope you're
I
right.
do think I believe that if smaller builders were unleashed in Howard County and had flexibility in terms of zoning and approvals in order to create the units and were given a playbook as to how to create those units, along with clarity about the resources that would be available to target some of the policy goals of diverse affordability levels, that are typical, whether it's building on county-owned property, right? So therefore, you have the subsidy of land, or land being subsidized, whether it is subsidy for homeowners, right, in order to bring down the purchase price. I think that if it's looking at attainable housing or naturally occurring affordable or some income levels, diverse income levels above the 60% of AMI for rental, that there may need to seriously be a consideration about pilots for those units, again, to make it more affordable or to rather have a greater affordable levels. Like those are some of the tools and resources that if they are predictable, that builders and developers will come because there is a market for homeownership opportunities at various income levels. There are parts of other parts in other counties which are less desirable and home prices, may almost be pushing our starter home prices, and those counties are providing subsidies and people want to live there and they're taking that risk in those emerging markets. Howard County is not an emerging market. So I think that, we can, but it has to be predictable. And I think that's what's important. And so I think your idea in terms of a form-based zoning creates that predictability that builders can organize around, with clarity about what are the resources that could help support those efforts.
Jacqueline, I would echo that, and just kind of taking off my Bozzuto hat for a little bit. Just as a young developer, like you have to know who the target builder is going to be, and if you're going to put some of these demands or this vision on a smaller builder, you definitely can't have them go through the same process for project approvals like a Bozzuto. Bozzuto can handle the additional time, handle the fees that it takes to get a project started. A small developer cannot. So I think it really needs to be streamlined and kind of targeted for that type of builder if you're going down that path.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that's a great point. And that, what we could think about as we sort of get more into the details is a program that would really create those opportunities, that would have a streamlined set of reviews to make it easier. And, the other thing with going after smaller builders is, as we all try to promote more equity in the business, there are a lot of minority builders who just don't have the capital and the time to do the bigger stuff. But this is a way to help that whole cohort, whether they're minority or not. Frankly, it's smaller builders. And we do know that, some of those are minorities, and we're trying to create more opportunities for other builders. This is a way to do that. So it adds that typically government goal to the program.
I had that same concern because in our earlier meeting, it was stated that it takes 4 or 5 years to get through the approval process. And if the AMI changes yearly, this becomes a real moving target for any kind of a developer to plan the financials to make the project pay off. So I have that same concern about the approval process, so that these new units can come online in a relatively short time frame.
So you can combine it with an expedited review process or something.
Right.
Yeah.
10 or few units, 3 acres, different length.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else anyone wants to say to any of these prompts before we really appreciate the
Well,
discussion?
I guess Jessica, I like the prompts. Good to really have these out here. I think we might want to think about what order to handle these things in. They're not all at the same time. I think if I were designing, if it were just on me to design a program, I would think, all right, what are the big pieces of that? Is it the density bonus? What is that going to look like, overall? And then you start to get back to the details, about, all right, how do we reach this population or that population? What is that target? How do we integrate it with the app vote chart? How do we make it streamlined and make it by right, perhaps, or the other issues we've talked about with that, all these other pieces. But in some ways, I think we need the overarching concepts first.
Hey, we'll take that feedback, and for our next meeting, we can try to set things up as overarching concepts, kind of prompt some of these discussions. And then, Peter, I'm going to put it back on you and say, all your copious free time, if you want to start back and napkin sketching out a program, as you discussed, to raise up for the group to kind of tease apart, I think that would be very helpful. But appreciate the feedback.
I think one other thing on your definitional aspect, Of course, there's for sale components and then there's rental components. And when we talk about affordability in each, some of those AMIs kind of come into play as well about what is the AMI that would be appropriate for home ownership versus what is the AMI that's appropriate for rental. And there's always desires to serve lower AMIs in home ownership, and somebody can practically come up with a mortgage that's affordable and things like that. But often what's not considered is, maintenance, upkeep, and how to deal with those issues that come up in a home ownership perspective when, your HVAC system goes up and you got a $10,000 problem, and, it's appropriate to have someone in a 40 or 50% AMI be in a home ownership position and be able to care for that. And how does that work in the community that you're trying to define as the community? You want to see upkeep and that, and keep out housing prices, within the market stable. So I think there should be some discussion as to affordability within the product or within the tenure, whether it be a rental affordability standard or a home ownership affordability standard, because I think there is a threshold in each one that's different.
Thank you, Ned. And then I will say, if you guys, in your expert opinion, have a good idea of what those thresholds are, and want to follow up with emails, that would be very helpful for us because, we know that people spend their entire lives specializing in affordable housing issues, and have much better, closer tap on the pulse for that. So, unless there's more anyone, I'm going to quickly go over the zoning overlay that we talked about, which is kind of how we talked about it a little bit. Very quickly, in our last meeting, we talked about there's a need to kind of look at what housing types are currently present, where is housing currently more affordable than in other neighborhoods. Can we identify neighborhoods where we could do specific incentive programs to try to introduce more affordable units into those areas? Should we think about, if you can go to slide 19, should we think about what specific criteria do we need to require of that kind of development so that it can proceed by right and so that it can move more quickly through our review processes? And looking at how do we make sure that we're deconcentrating poverty as well as affordable housing. Obviously, we're constantly running the numbers in terms of where the land is least expensive. That's where it makes most sense to try to build affordable housing. But then you could potentially end up with all your affordable housing going into areas that it already may exist. We looked at the map on slide 20 of the distribution of our mean sales prices, kind of how we have that east-west divide in Howard County. On slide 21, we looked at the distribution of the moderate income housing units. And I do apologize, our system is severely lagged, so I'm probably plowing ahead of where it can actually end up. Sorry, Joe. Kind of looking at where the MSUs go. And then the final thing I wanted to show you guys, and this is a new item, this was a request of one of the work group members to ask us to do this analysis. They asked us to look at single family detached homes and then looked at their assessed value. So we're looking at a single family detached home on an acre and what the value is, with the idea being that you could potentially identify both lots where there is physical land available potentially for redevelopment or infill development, and where the cost of that home and that land is a little bit lower, and so the numbers might work out. And so this was a request of one of the members on this group to see if we could start at geographically identifying areas where it might make sense to try to target an overlay. So that is part of the product, and this is in your meeting materials. It's going to be the very last page of your meeting materials, if you guys want to review that. I would be very interested in hearing from the group if this kind of geographic analysis is helpful in identifying where you might want to target a zoning overlay. And then I'll move into the slide 23, which is some of the prompting questions that we had
Hey,
developed.
Jessica, before you move off the slide, I may be stuck on stupid a little bit. Can you explain it again as to what this means? I'm just, and maybe give an example. I just want to make sure I'm understanding it.
Yeah, so this analysis is basically, the request was, we want you to look at density and we want you to look at assessed value. So what you're seeing here is, let's say you have a single unit on 1 acre. So you have one single family detached home on 1 acre. And you could have one of those homes selling for $200,000, and that's going to come in at the very low yellow color because it's low density and low assessed value. You could also have a single family detached home on 1 acre that's selling for $3 million, and that might fall sort of in the middle or on the upper tier of the dark red color. So you're kind of trying to look for, on the lighter yellow, you're looking at, it's a combination of larger lots that have a lower assessed value. And then on the upper scale, you're looking at potentially smaller lots with a higher value. And it's kind of a spectrum, kind of giving you an idea. So it could be a combination of, it could be a fairly large home that's very expensive on a small lot, or it could be the land is assessed quite a bit. I think that's an accurate representation of what the map shows. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And so this is kind of partly what we have in Howard County, is that because a significant portion of our development pattern has been fairly low density, we actually have quite a bit of land that still has a lot of development potential. That land, though, is really tied up in existing built environments. So these are a lot of large lot developments. If you look at kind of the development patterns for the last 10 years, a lot of these are getting built up and they are being developed, but they're being developed at our lower density current zoning. So you'll see that 1 acre turning into 4 homes. You know, you have 1 home, now it's going to have 4 homes. And so I think part of what this is proposing is, if we want to introduce missing middle housing types, if we want to introduce affordable housing types, should we try to target zoning overlay to these areas where physically it might be feasible, both from purchasing the home and also having the physical land to develop it. Obviously, and I kind of want to get your feedback on that, because it might be that we end up not introducing a lot of affordable housing project to neighborhoods that have a very high assessed value, and therefore you end up with kind of separating neighborhoods that have assessed value, high assessed value, kind of are able to generate a lot of wealth. But then again, those neighborhoods physically may not be able to produce more housing, both because of size or prohibitive cost. So that's kind of what this map, I think, if that's an accurate representation, if you guys want to chat about. I thought it was quite interesting to look at the county.
It worries me that it's, on the last point you made, is that if we could wind up perpetuating the have and have not. The red areas are expensive homes, probably on smaller lots. And the yellow areas are less expensive homes on larger lots. And so the developer in me would be attracted to the yellow areas because I could buy it less expensively. But if all developers acted the way I would, then we would all be rushing into yellow areas where presumably there is some existing affordable housing, and away from the red areas where there is no affordable housing. And that doesn't feel right.
And the other challenge, of course, also is you're a zoning overlay. If you do that, you're going to be changing the character of the neighborhood. So the existing folks that live there may not.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of off of 29 where my in-laws live.
Yeah.
So there's it's R20 zoning. A home on an acre that was built 30-40 years ago, and they're dividing those acres in 2, putting another home next door to it. And
all through that neighborhood.
All through that neighborhood. And it's R20 zoning, so you can't put 3 or 4 homes, but they could put 1 additional home. And of course, the new home is not affordable. It's very expensive, right? So it's not, that's not achieving the housing affordability. If we put a zoning overlay and say, okay, you can put 4 homes, make them townhomes, that might create some more affordability, but of course, the neighborhoods don't feel like that.
Well, what if, rather than having an overlay zone that we physically targeted to this particular neighborhood or intersection, what if it was a floating zone over something like this map, where you applied additional criteria? So you're not trying to divide 12,000 square foot lots into 2 6,000 square foot. So it has to be a greater than X square feet or acres. Which I had more things on my list, but you know what I mean by floating zones, so that you can do this affordable housing thing in the planned service area. However, your site must have the following characteristics. Maybe it's just 2 or 3. I don't know what they are just yet.
So I will say that we talked about the difference between, from a zoning perspective, the difference between floating and an overlay. Because an overlay is something that's already applied, and you can set criteria that it has to adhere to. But it essentially, that's how you set up by right allowances under certain criteria, because it's already pre-applied. And you can make overlays both more permissive and more restrictive. Classic example, historic districts, those tend to be overlays. Floating zones, because you're actively pulling down the zoning and applying it to a site, it has to go through a separate review process. That's when you typically end up before the zoning board. And so floating zones, by their nature, end up not being by right processes. And I know that this group had discussed the challenges between those by right processes and the time and unpredictability associated with them. So I think that that's.
All right, well, I'll work on some criteria then, because I don't like my floating.
I just, and I'm going to readily tell you that Howard County zoning regs use those terms interchangeably. So that's just the model of the tool,
I mean,
but we use the terms.
I've actually done 4 floating zones, but that was at a different time.
Yeah. CEF, like a CEF?
Actually 5.
Okay.
CEF and 4 PSCs.
Oh, okay, right, yes.
But it's different now. So we're not going to be floating, I mean, overlay with some criteria. And I got to criteria.
So I'm curious if the group has any, Jeff, do you mind going to the next slide? And then if you want to reference this material, it is on the link in the chat box at the last page. Talking about looking at where our MIHUs are, looking at where we have school closures, looking at where we have concentrations of kind of more naturally occurring attainable housing versus more expensive housing. Do you guys have a sense of how you might want to geographically target any kind of program that we develop, understanding that we haven't discussed what those programs would be? Or do you think it's really a matter of we need to evaluate all the zoning districts in the county? We need to evaluate the housing that we allow throughout the county? Or is there value in doing a very specific geographic targeting to kind of really target a kind of housing that we want in a specific area based on everything that we have talked about in our meetings?
I've done a bunch of pre-submission meetings for residential developments over the years. And each time I have to introduce the idea that there will be MIHUs. I often hear, well, why are you doing it here? We already have so much affordable housing here, naturally or otherwise. Why aren't you doing it in River Hill? Why aren't you doing it in some other place? I mean, there's other places so much. And I never have a good answer for that, because since they're right, I'm following the rules, I'm developing the way I'm supposed to, and I'm letting them know at the meeting that this is what's coming. And they say, well, how come we have to follow the rules, but River Hill didn't? So I think we have to try to right that wrong.
So
sorry.
no, please, you guys first. I'm just here.
one of the concepts I brought up, I think it was last meeting, was Montgomery County's focus on sector plans. And I was looking at Howard County's planning and zoning website and the list of community and master plans that the department has done. And I see Ellicott City, the Gateway area, downtown Columbia, and what's the other one? Columbia Village Centers. Have those been, productive and, successful? And is there an appetite to take that more concentrated approach, looking at certain areas? And again, this is a little bit more comprehensive than just affordable housing, but you start getting into density of certain land parcels, and you can also tackle affordable housing approach to that. I'll call it a sector plan or community master plan. Is that type of approach on a broader level than what's been done historically something worth considering in Howard County?
You know what, quite honestly, you're going to get a lot of my kind of planning opinion in this is I think it's too early to tell for a lot of those. A lot of the more geographically specific area planning that has occurred in Howard County is, adopted within the last 20 years. And we're still kind of trying to shake out and see if it's actually coming online. It's a little hard to see how much the plan and then the subsequent regulatory framework that was built to implement those plans is responsible for whether we're actually building or not, or if it's, we've had a pandemic, we've had a recession. There's a lot of factors that go into why a developer may or may not move forward, or a homeowner or a property owner may or may not move forward with implementing a plan. I think there's been process challenges. I think some of the feedback we've received for some of our master plans, I'm thinking about downtown, as well as some of our village centers, is that very lengthy processes, a lot of unpredictability, and that the plan might not have been built with enough flexibility to respond to the market and market changes. Kind of our Ellicott City plan, I think, is actually one of our more successful, but it was really focused pretty heavily on a lot of government interventions in response to, changes from flooding and kind of that investment. Those are underway, and I think have been successful, but I would defer partly to the business owners who live down there. Those are the kind of the ones that I personally have been tracking for the last 6 years and kind of my assessment.
We do have a Route 1 corridor plan, which has had mixed success. There's a Route 40 corridor plan, which has had a little bit of success. But I wouldn't point to either one of those as the way forward. Justin, you mentioned the village centers. They have a 16-step redevelopment plan. You have to go through 16 steps, which takes about 3 years, if you get through it. And I'll point to Hickory Ridge as the example of a determined developer who wanted to make it work and could not. And it took them 3 years to get a solid no. So I like the idea of sector plans, but they haven't really rooted themselves here. But they're going to need to, because our activities centers, the ones that are really going to be the center of where most of the densest residential development outside Columbia or outside downtown Columbia will be, they're the village centers plus a couple of other spots. So we need to figure that out. Right now, they're in our way. They're barriers.
And I don't know if there's anyone else who's developed or worked in Howard County. I know that our general plan really focuses on, it's heavily based in character and kind of looking at, well, these are what the regulations say your setbacks, height, massing, and character is supposed to be. And then there's the actual built environment and the aspects of those communities that as they were actually developed. And I know there's a lot of discussion about how do we introduce more form-based design guidance that will allow redevelopment to occur in those in a way that doesn't feel out of place with what's already existing there. And that's kind of the challenge that I know that the entire community is going to be wrestling with and probably implementing in the next decade. So I appreciate the feedback in terms of doing more sector area plan and doing more specific planning, and that maybe that is the approach for talking about these incentive programs and talking about density if the county starts transitioning into more of that sector model.
The other thing I would expect to hear is developer for activity center X stand up in a meeting and propose to do 300 units of this, 100,000 square feet of retail, small office, and something else, have 20% affordable housing. And there'll be someone who will stand up at that meeting and say, we already have enough affordable housing here. Why are you dumping it on us? And there's not a good, we don't have a good solution for that guy.
Any other thoughts about geographic targeting of programs or incentives to try to encourage the development of affordable housing?
Well, affordable housing is needed throughout the county. I don't know how you can designate one area and have that supply housing for those in need. I mean, the starting salary for Howard County teachers is in the low income zone. So trying to designate one area would seem to be okay if you're using it as like a pilot program to get it going through the rest of the county, but affordable housing is required everywhere. So having people, whatever, living in Ellicott City and working in Laurel or wherever, you're just creating traffic problems and additional expense for those people. So I say it needs to be across the board.
Right.
And
Anyone
I'd say
else?
that's true. That's true as well. Just the consideration for, again, the definition of affordable and what income brackets you're targeting. I mean, obviously, as you get into the lower income brackets, you get into the need for transit and access to jobs and close proximity and walkability and all those elements. Because, as you get into lower level, there may not be a car involved. They may need or be dependent on mass transit. Now, of course, Howard County has some issues in those particular areas as well, which, probably the only real transit is the stuff that goes through in Columbia. But, accessibility to jobs and at least having that may incentivize the highest densities that you're looking for these type of products.
This is Catherine. I'm still a little stuck on the map with the yellow and the red. And I would have to piggyback on what the other gentleman says, or really what both of you all said. The one thing is it is needed across Howard County. Two, this is Howard County. So given my transportation background, I've always challenged this, is that when you move to a county such as Howard County, what you'll find in a study is that most people have access to a car. So I want to I challenge anybody to look into that and see if that's still correct. And then when you think about that, does it really play a part into where you decide to build the affordable housing in that sense? Because that has always been nerve-wracking to me, because Howard County is only so big. And so when you start concentrating on that one area, then you're not utilizing, the whole county as a whole, getting back to the whole teacher situation who do fall into that AMI. So I guess the reason why I'm kind of still stuck here, hearing from the developer side, is that and this is just me, being a little stuck in this mindset. So are you telling me that it's not attractive to a developer to go in an area that may be orange to develop for affordable housing? Is that the bottom line? I just trying to want to bring this home in my mind.
No,
Is that Mhm.
it's attractive, but expensive.
Okay?
So if I have to pay $1 million an acre in the orange area and
Right.
$500,000 an acre in the yellow, and I can sell basically the same house or the same lot in yellow as I would in orange, I'll do yellow.
Right. So is that something that so yeah, okay, I get it now. So it's about the money, and I understand that. Everything's about the money. So is that something that what
Density
would
was
incentivize you to kind of more tax credit? I'm just trying to tie it all
Give me
together.
more density in the orange so that I can divide up that, let's say it's a 20,000 square foot lot. Let me
Mhm.
put 8 units on that lot in the orange.
Mhm.
Let me do 4 in the yellow or something like that. Some
Okay,
way.
I think I get it. Okay.
So if I'm paying $1 million for that 20,000 square foot piece of ground and I get
Mhm.
10 units out of it, it costs me $100,000 a unit. Build a house on it, and it'll wind up being closer to being affordable than if I only got 5 units to the acre. So give me density, give me some guidelines, maybe give me some help on the really low AMI folks. And
Mhm.
I'm
That
gonna,
was helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm gonna speak up as an administrator, is that assessed values, those change almost on a monthly basis. And as we all know, regulations are not that adaptable and flexible on that timeline. So I will say a geographic based incentive program that's tied to assessed value would be almost impossible to
well, I wouldn't
administer.
do it now.
So,
They're 3 years out of date the day that they're printed.
yeah.
So
So, but I think this helps show at least where we have, larger lots and where their assessed value might be, and or a combination of the two.
like Jeff said, I expect that, I think I can see his in-laws neighborhood from here. It's red. So those yellow lots, when your in-laws moved in, are now red.
Right.
And there's not a lot of room for a guy like me there.
There's more density and plus it's more because.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to quickly go through the next thing, and then obviously we will continue our discussion into the next week. But I'm going to ask Jeff to kind of dig into that a little bit. They do get shorter as we go. So next one is kind of talking about development incentives. This was specifically the request they had to kind of have this group evaluate the feasibility of a targeted incentive program. Peter, I think this actually gets a little bit to what you were talking about, design your program, figure out what your overarching concepts and goals are, and then we'll start pulling the pieces of a development incentive, of a zoning, of subsidies together. So I think what we were hoping for is this group to kind of give us leads on different kinds of incentive programs that you have seen be effective in helping affordable housing come into fruition, whether that's private or public incentives. I'm going to keep going just till we get to what kind of density bonuses are needed, at what scale to make the numbers work, what kind of relief to that, that bubble, that development setbacks are needed. What kind of, we talk about time, and we talk about the length of time it takes to get through the process, and then the length of time that's added when you're also adding in adequate public facility tests and mitigation. And then get into all the different kind of regulations and mechanisms that people have tried to do affordable. We talked a little bit about APFO, and that was on slide 28. we showed you the affordable housing set aside on 29. Slide 30 showed you the areas which are really targeted for growth. Those are the activity centers in downtown Columbia versus all the other areas. We talked about the school capacity chart and included the map showing you the current closures. This is kind of where we're seeing restrictions. We talked a little bit our last meeting about the different adequate public facility exemptions that exist. And I asked Jeff's team if they could run the numbers and show, well, how many units have ever been produced based on the exemptions? We went back to 2010. We had a total of 259 units come online in the last 14 years under the exemptions that existed. You can see that some of the exemptions have never been used and some have not really been producing many units. So what other exemptions might we want to consider? And on slide 34, told you a little bit about what the AFO task force is discussing. And I wanted to give us about 10 minutes, if we can, to talk on slide 35 about some of the prompting questions around development and process incentives, since those are really one of the elements that's a major barrier is the amount of time and the very complex processes we have to go through development here. And if you guys, since you guys have worked in other jurisdictions or have worked in Howard County, kind of what are your experiences for how we can overcome those barriers? I know I threw a lot at you.
I'm sorry, this last barrier you're saying, is that the cost, the density, how are you defining this? The process?
Sorry?
So this slide 35, you're saying the barrier is the process, just the slow, difficult process?
Yeah, so the development process. We talk about, many different plan reviews that we have to go through, the fact that you have to meet, forest and stormwater management requirements, that you have to potentially go through entitlement processes to even be able to proceed with knowing the number of units that you will be allowed to develop. We talked a little bit earlier in today's meeting about, certain developers who are not the big developers, they need a more streamlined track. So this is talking a little bit about the tracks that people go through the development process. And if there's particular incentives that you think would help fast track getting affordable housing online and overcome the barriers that happen when, if it takes you 5 or 6 years, you've lost your affordable housing subsidy and now you're not going to be able to proceed forward.
Well, there was just a study/article on it published by the Mercatus Center at George Mason on how to streamline housing permitting in Maryland. I could forward that.
That would be wonderful. And I will happily share it with the group as well.
In your way shortly. I haven't read it all, so I don't know all what's in it, but there are a bunch of suggestions.
That article does talk about a shot clock. It doesn't think highly of the shot clock, but I think we need a shot clock here in Howard County. I think after, when you submit a plan, you should expect a reply to the plan within, say, 60 days. It used to be the norm. We've fallen way off that now. So I would have a 60-day shot clock on each plan review. And I would say that after the second plan review, if you are not already approved or technically approved, it should be just immediately forwarded to the Director of Planning and Zoning because there's something wrong.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it must be full of examples, Paul, but we just got held up for, I don't know how long, because to get a waiver we needed to fix some stormwater management stuff and drainage, 3 directors had to meet. It's like the 3 directors, it's kind of, I could just see it as a novel or a movie. And, how do you get those people together? And they have to make, it's intentionally meant to slow things down. There's no other reason why you would do that.
It's inertia against a plan. I mean, it's not just a whim, it's a plan. And so most of this can be handled administratively. I do admit that the remaining ground that we're developing is more difficult and is trickier and has many more environmental constraints than we ever had before. But if you haven't been able to solve it with 2 plan submissions by a real engineer experienced in the county, with very good reviewers on the staff, then there's a problem. And it needs to get more attention and direction from department heads. So that'd be my solution, is to put a shot clock on the plans and get the leadership involved after 2 failures. I've got a couple other very technical, so sorry if this is too much inside baseball, but I would also allow for simultaneous review of the environmental concept plan and the sketch plan. It used to be that we could do that. Now it's sequential. You have to do the ECP, then you do the sketch plan. Both are too long, but that's 2 years of your life just to satisfy those 2 plan requirements. Now, you do so at your own risk if you submit them simultaneously and one conflicts with the other and you have to keep iterating them back and forth. But you can choose to do that, or should be able to choose to do that.
Any of our other, not to cut you off, Paul, any of our other experienced developers have any thoughts on programs that have been helpful for you for fast tracking things or incentivizing adding affordable housing?
I'll just quickly go back to one I suggested before, which was make it by right. Get rid of all of the discretionary decisions.
I'll second that.
Yeah. I would add to that I would suggest modifying APFO to award allocations upon plan submission, not approval, plan submission, and to test for schools upon plan submission. Because the APFO chart assumes that the subdivision process takes 3 years. It no longer does, it takes 5 years. So we're looking at the wrong columns in the APFO chart as it is. So let's just be honest with ourselves and tell us, award the allocations when the plan is submitted. If the plan fails, then you avoid the allocations. Pass or fail a school test when your plan is submitted, so you know whether or not to take the next 2 or 3 years of your life to pursue the project.
Well, I'd say also take it out of the political realm that it's in right now for affordable deals that have to go back to the council to decide whether they want to award a pilot to it. That every affordable deal since I've been around and 20 years before that got pilots, and now they're determining whether it's discretionary to give something a pilot because they think that might unlock the door to APFO and allow them to move forward. It becomes all political, and it really shouldn't be.
Totally agree.
I know we're inching down the last 10 minutes, so we will continue our discussions. We'll take your guys' feedback for how you want this presented, but what I'm going to recommend is take a little bit of Peter's advice, but we're going to combine a lot of these prompting questions. If we can move on to the next slide. Also, we didn't have a chance to really dig in on it today, but we do want to give some time to talking specifically about how we can encourage home ownership opportunities. That was a specific request of the policies for general plan as it was adopted. And then also in your meeting materials, we'll follow up with you in an email, but we have provided a draft version of your findings and recommendations based on what input you've provided up to this point. If you guys have a chance to review that and any edits or additional comments you want to have it's really going to be the basis of the work product of this whole group. So we want to make sure it really reflects your entire discussion. For our next meeting, we're going to continue the discussions that we've had today. We're going to review and finalize that recommendations matrix. And then the ask I have for you, and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget this, is that first I want to let you know that the Adequate Public Facilities Task Force is hosting a public meeting this Wednesday at the Columbia 50 Plus Center. And that is at, what is the time? 7 p.m. It is in person. They'll be taking testimony if anyone wants to attend that. It's also going to be live streamed, but participation has to be in person. And then we've also had a request from the Adequate Public Facility Task Force if we could send a representative from this group to present your findings and initial recommendations to them at their November 20th meeting. And that's from 6 to 8:30. So I'm going to send out an email and request a volunteer from this group who would be available to talk a little bit about what you guys have discussed in the findings and recommendations. And we were hopeful that you could present the draft matrix if you guys agree that it represents your discussions. So I'm gonna put that out there and then hope one of you will be available, and I will start to hound you more increasingly as we approach that timeline. But wanted to let you guys, that is November 20th. It's a Wednesday and it's from 6 to 8:30. And then the last thing I'll say is don't hesitate with any research requests or questions you have based on what's been presented or missing information that would help you in your process. So that's what I have for you today. And Jeff, do you mind throwing up the draft matrix so that you guys can just see what it looks like so you can recognize it? It's in the meeting materials. You guys do not have the link to the web page. I can also make sure I send that. I know for me, I need things bounced up to the top of my inbox all the time or it gets lost. So this basically set up summarizing what your charge was, a little bit of definitions, and then we are trying to capture the themes and the challenges that you discussed, as well as some of the tools and ideas that you guys have proposed. And we certainly want this to reflect all of your various input and ideas. So I'm gonna pause there. Questions, thoughts in our last 7 minutes?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if once we go through this, if there's anything that we feel that should be added as we look at the matrix here, we just need to send it to you or continue to discuss. I just want to make sure what timeline am I working with?
So our next meeting is set up for November 18th. So if you guys can, in the next week and a half, next 10 days, review this, and you can email me, and that's jessicabella@howardcountymd.gov. We'll make sure that this gets into, you can also send it to Lisa. I know she sent it to, or Jeff or Sarah. We'll all make sure that we get it in the right place.
And that's J Bella.
Yes, thank you.
J Bella.
Sorry.
And this is, you emailed this to us or you said it's on a link?
So this is currently posted as meeting materials on the Affordable Housing webpage. The chat box for this meeting actually should have a link to that webpage on it, so you can download it directly. We'll also follow up and send you a direct email as well.
Great.
After this.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys. And let us know if you would prefer it in a Word document so that you guys can edit it a little easier. We'll send that an email.
I would prefer Word. But either way, so.
Okay, we'll make sure we follow up. Any other thoughts? You guys are like not even an inch wide, so I can't see any nods. So, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. You all have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's all.
Bye.